So Charlotte is the Dowager Countess of Peterborough, and she's a 28-year-old widow. Like I said, starting in this scene, she's just starting. It's towards the beginning of the book. It's the meet cute, and she's just starting to reintegrate into Taunton society after mourning her husband. Belle, who you'll hear referenced in this passage, is her best friend, and Charles was her husband. William, the hero, is almost 20, between his second and final year at Oxford, but has had to begin learning the earldom because his father's a drunkard. So they've caught sight of each other in an earlier scene at her first ball back, and both felt an attraction. So he approaches her and their host of this ball for an introduction. The host is her friend, and he's very lax on titles. He's very lax about a lot of things, actually, and introduces her as the Countess of Peterborough rather than the Dowager Countess. His mother, who helps him kind of shadow manage the earldom, asked William to see if the Earl of Peterborough was in attendance and to discuss a parliamentary alliance. So William changes course from the introduction to ask about her husband. She flees to the garden unprepared for that question, and he follows to apologize once he finds out the real situation. And we're joining this scene just after his apology.
Take it away.
William went to speak, but Charlotte raised a hand. My response to your innocent inquiry was unnecessarily harsh, and I apologize. Whilst this is one of my first social events since Charles' passing, I should not have attended if I was not ready to be polite. Lady Peterborough, he held his hand out as though asking to hold hers. Did he not recall formal etiquette? There could be no hand-holding between them. He might not even have learned it yet, given his youth. Well, this she could handle. She glanced down at it, then pointedly back up at his face. Dropping his hand between them, further pinning her skirts, he did not seem to realize that it brushed her thigh. The audacity of the puppy. Straightening her spine an inch, she raised her brows at him. He smiled, leaning in. No apology is needed, to my mind. However, if you feel it necessary, my response is that allowing me to sit and bask in your beauty erases all memories of faux pas from my thoughts. She snorted, ignoring the spurt of pleasure in her chest to shake her head side to side. Oh, please, try that on someone your own age. Had she thought him audacious? Impertinent was more like it. I beg your pardon, my lady. I was being truthful. I could stare at you all night. His hair flopped onto his forehead again as he leaned toward her. Charlotte remained silent, staring at him and trying to ignore the thump of her heart and spurt of heat between her legs. Nor did she want to catalog the pull of his jacket over his muscled shoulder and biceps as he twisted, or the strain of his breeches around powerful thighs. His eyes were deep pools of liquid darkness, his lips plush and parted. He moved his hand on the bench an inch, the pinky pressing against her, then retracting. May I hold your hand, please, Lady Peterborough? The impact radiated down to her toes, curling them in her slippers, and up, tightening her nipples and bringing heat to her cheeks. Oh my, he is potent. She did not answer William, instead turning her head away with another snort. Her skirts loosened, and out of the corner of her eye, she caught his hand lifting toward her. Snap! She smacked his knuckles with her folded fan. Impertinent and audacious, she amended her earlier thoughts. At least she wasn't the only one being inappropriate this evening. Lord Stanton, you do not have permission to touch me. Lady Peterborough, 'tis William, please. He rushed on. You have my apology. Will you please forgive me, please? She gave a small sniff, still fighting with her conscience over Belle's suggestion. Did she dare? His next question answered that. How may I make it up to you? At his words, the devil in her reared its head, overriding her conscience. She'd been lonely this past year and a half. While Belle insisted that she could meet someone who fit her sexually, she was not so sure. The breeze shifted and his scent floated to her. Tempered sweetness of spiced rum with something else she couldn't name after being alone so long. No matter, it was delicious. She tilted her head and ran her gaze up and down his form, her pulse racing. Lingering for a moment on his lap, she licked her lips before forcing herself to continue searching. Her gaze settled on his neck before raising to his face. Remove your cravat. Charlotte, Lady Peterborough, you heard me, and you do not have permission to use my given name. It is Lady Peterborough, or she sucked in a breath, trying not to pant as she attempted to rein in her inner devil, but it had slipped its lead and was running wild. Mistress P. His eyes bulged and his throat moved on a swallow. He lifted his hands hesitantly to his cravat. Gracious, he was actually following her command. She'd been sure his reaction would be insulted dismissal, or worse, laughter. Another hot wave of arousal washed over her. Undoing the pin and knot, he slid the cravat from around his neck to hold it across his lap. What now, Mistress P? You may make amends by keeping your hands to yourself, and I shall help you do that. Charlotte reached over and slid one end of the necktie through his loose hold. She pulled it from under his hands to his wrists, crossed the two ends, and raised his hands using the linen. He shifted and opened his mouth as though to protest. She glared at him through her lashes. Hold still. With his hands between them, she leaned forward an inch and wrapped the ends under his wrists, around to the top, and under again. As he watched, mouth open, she tied the ends into a loose double knot over the wrapping, well out of reach of his thumbs. It would take him a minute or two to figure out that she had left it loose enough for him to bend one hand and get his fingers to the knot to pick at it. Still amazed at his willingness to sit still for her ministrations, she schooled her features. All of this open-mindedness could simply be lack of maturity. However, she could still take her fun. Before she straightened, her inner devil, she liked to think it had Belle's voice, made her lean in further, closing that gap, to brush her breasts against his knuckles, inhaling his scent again. He jerked. Lady, Mistress P? He asked, his voice a croak. Ah, youth. Just testing that you have learned not to grab people without permission, she smirked. Absolutely, Mistress P, he was gasping. Her inner devil preened. She'd not been allowed out in so long, she was enjoying this tiny show of power. Now that you have me at your mercy, what will you do with me? The upward lilt of the question sounded hopeful. Remind you to play with children your own age.